Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we have a full cast. We have me, Scott, Chris, Phil, Jeff, and Ty in that order, top to bottom, left to right. Good to see you all. In this episode, we are talking about something we have not really discussed ever on this channel, and that is cards from the 1990s and maybe early 2000s potentially. Through 2004, it kind of feels like that's what it is in that era. And the reason we want to talk about this is because I recently picked up a big 1990s card. It is a Larry Walker. It is a Precious Metal Gem Masters 1/1. So arguably, in my opinion, Larry Walker's best card ever made. I'll share my screen momentarily once I pass it off to Ty to chat and show you what the card looks like. But I went and picked this card up, and I paid a pretty high price for it. And we want to talk to Jeff and Chris and explain to them, because Ty and I, and even Phil, like 90s cards. And we want to tell them why we like it and see if we can convert them on this episode. So, Ty, while I pull up that Larry Walker to show what it looks like, what do you think of 90s cards?
It's second to none. I love it. It's the genesis of everything we have now. When the manufacturers started introducing parallels and inserts in the 90s, it changed the hobby forever. And there it is. This puts Scott into an elite class of collectors from the 90s. 1/1. There are not many, unlike today's products, which have like 19 1/1s of every player in each product. This is very, very rare. This is basically the most desirable card of any given player from the 1990s. And it's spectacular. And I'm jealous that you're in this club now.
Thanks,
Envious.
Ty.
Envious, I believe, is the correct word, but it's amazing. And I love the 90s. And I mean, that's when I started collecting. So I'm always going to have a preference toward that.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you. It's nice to own this card. It's fun. So it's great. So let me ask you this, Chris. What do you think of the 1990s? I know you got in the hobby in 2020-ish, or got back into it. The 90s, have you touched them? Have you done anything with them? Does it intrigue you? Why does it? Why does it not? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was still collecting in the 90s, like in my initial run of anti-girl pro baseball card lifestyle that I used to live. I'll be honest, I was a lot happier back then, fellas. Like, just, the stress levels were way, way lower, way lower. Yeah, I mean, some 90s stuff does look great. Like, I definitely, there's a couple parallels I go after. Well, I've lost them all, but I still attempt to get them. Like the 93 Finest Refractors is, that's like one of the most iconic parallels ever. 96 Topps Chrome Refractors, like the first year of Topps Chrome Refractors. Those are amazing. I have dreams of completing the Braves team set in that, but I just keep getting sniped on the Chipper Jones. So it hasn't led me anywhere. And the Chipper Jones Desert Shield card from 91 Topps is a personal grail of mine. I love that set is phenomenal. I think it's one of the best things Topps ever did. And I love those cards long term. But once you get into like the late 90s and these weird like parallels you're talking about, I know like there's like mirror reds and certified golds and stuff out of like some pinnacle sets. It loses me. I just don't know what any of those words mean or what those cards are.
We're going to change that today, Chris.
The funny thing about that is I recently have dove headfirst into this all. And now I'm just trying to get as many cool Larry Walkers as I can get. I was able to pick up a Red Crusade out of 25, which is a pretty big card. I was able to pick up a Finest Embossed Gold Refractor die cut of Larry Walker, which is a really big card. About 20 to 40 of those were made. And I'm working on a certified gold mirror, as well as the totally certified mirror gold, what's it called? Platinum. That's out of 30. So like, I know these words and things are all crazy, but the funny thing is the difference between 90s cards versus the cards now, there are so fewer desirable cards, but they're easy to identify. And the sets are massive with set collectors. So even your cards are going to appreciate outside of just the player, right? If you have a Hall of Famer out of that set, it's going to appreciate because people are trying to complete the set of those rare cards. And it's actually easier in a lot of ways to identify them. And sets carry big weights, not just individual rookie year cards, which is really special about this era, in my opinion.
I do like the fact that those players, they can't get hurt today and have their card values go down. So that's an intriguing possibility. I mean, they can still get hurt in their lives, but it shouldn't affect their card values.
Yeah.
It shouldn't.
Ty, do you agree with what I just said about it being
Yeah.
easier in some ways once you
Yeah,
learn
I
about
do.
it.
I mean, back then it was hard to keep track of things. We get the Beckett price guide, and you'd have all these. They'd have to abbreviate it even back then with the pages because there were so many different, cards being created. But really, in any given product, you'd have like 7 to 10 inserts and 1 parallel. That's it. That was a product. Now today, it's I don't know, 72 inserts and 197 parallels in each insert, and every new product that comes out has like 1 million different unique cards in it. And today it's completely overwhelming to the point where people who are getting back into the hobby now are incredibly overwhelmed because they don't know what the heck's going on and what, left from right. And that we're talking about a time even when there were multiple manufacturers. There was no monopoly back then for baseball, basketball, football. There were multiple manufacturers. So it was still a simpler time. Set checklists definitely blew up in the mid toward late 90s and onward from those earlier years. But I don't know, even like the Desert Shields was kind of like a precursor to, subsequent insert sets and things like that, or parallels, making those rare chases, Tiffany's and things like that back in the day. So definitely agree with what you said, Scott.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ty. And 90s cards, I've learned to love them lately. Jeff, what are your thoughts? Do you have any in your collection? Are these intriguing to you at all?
I don't, and not because I'm intentionally avoiding them. I guess it's just another learning curve, which I haven't tried to tackle, because in my initial hobby ventures, I was out of the hobby by about 91, 92, just when it started to expand. So I missed that entire expansion of the set deliveries, as well as all the different parallels and inserts. So when I came back in around 2017, I was struggling just to catch up with what was going on now. But I love seeing the cards like the Larry Walker you showed. It's a beautiful card. And one thing that Ty mentioned was a point that I had going on, rattling around in my head, which I wasn't sure, but it seems to confirm what he said, is the fact that there was some competition between companies.
Yes.
I think that's part of a reason that there were more creative cards then, because there was some competition between multiple companies and nobody had a monopoly over the license and could just pump out whatever they wanted. So I'm interested to hear more about that, if that is the case or not. And I'm excited to see some of these, because like Chris said, you don't have to worry about a player getting drilled in the hand by some meatball pitcher.
Yeah.
And
Amen to that, dude.
so I like that. That's a possibility without diving completely into vintage cards. Say it's somewhere in between, because it's guys I'm familiar with, grew up watching play.
And I have a couple thoughts, actually. The first one is, one nice thing about 90s cards, Ty mentioned this, is they do have parallels, and they have sufficient parallels in sets that look great. But on top of that, they don't have crazy numbering where there's 15 to 30 parallels. There's usually one, maybe 3 or 4. Like 1996, we have the mirror golds, the red mirror, the blue mirror, all those type of things. Like those cards, they have stated print runs. They're actually not numbered in 1996, but they're stated. And that was like the first time that really happened. But then a lot of times they'll have like 1999 Fleer Ultra, where you have the platinum medallion out of 100, and then you have the one-of-one masterpiece that's purple. It's right, and that's cool. They have the gold medallion that's non-numbered, but for numbered parallels, it can be great. And I just want to show you these real quick. And I want to show how cool looking these actually are. I picked one up because I love Larry Walker and I like Todd Helton. But like, look how cool this card is, right? A lot of it is very photograph centric. And some people might hate this photo, but I think it's really fun. Just him in the dugout, or him in the batting cage, just being a goofball. And these cards look fantastic. They're labeled really well, but like, they shine. So here is actually a Vin Baker, and they have this beautiful like platinum look to them that reflects, and they did a great job. And so these type of things are really pieces of art in a lot of ways. They kind of have a stadium club feel, but better in some ways, because
photography in the 90s was really, like, they were intentional about a lot of photographs in the 90s. Not everything was perfect, but they did a pretty good job.
Yeah. And so that's one thing I've learned to love. Let me see if I can find a few more baseball photos to show you how cool they actually look. Look at this, Philip. That's Ryan Leaf. If we scroll down, there's another Larry Walker. Here's a Roger Clemens. I don't know. There's just like a lot of style to it. Phil, we haven't heard from you quite yet. What are your thoughts on the 90s? I know you do some in it, but I don't know how heavy you are currently.
Yeah, a little bit, not a lot. I wouldn't consider myself an expert by any means. I actually own one card at this point, and I'll show a version of that pretty soon. But before we get into that, like, the reason why I haven't gotten too crazy with this stuff is because it just, especially a year ago, it felt a little bubbly to me. It felt like all everybody was talking about was the 90s era, and I was like, well, yes, like, but why now? Like, I understand by supply and demand dynamics, like why these would be attractive. And to be honest, maybe they're still underpriced because of that, because of the supply, because of the limited number of parallels and things like that. At the time when I was collecting in 95, 96, that's about when I faded away for a bit, when a lot of these were made later on. But what I really appreciate from these years is the photography, like Ty mentioned, but also the print quality, the creativity that Jeff touched on. The competition was definitely huge for these cards. One of the things I was thinking about this morning was 90s being popular is probably not a great thing for fanatics, because I think maybe not their target demographic, but their most active demographic is probably 35 to 50-year-old men. And who's buying 90s cards, right? And what are they not buying because they're buying 90s cards? It's 35 to 45-year-old dudes that are nostalgic, that aren't taking the stuff that they're trying to shovel down our throats, the new product, or instead going back to the 90s, safer, smaller supply, higher quality, to be honest. So I'm going to show a few examples of cards here. So here are just some examples of pretty cool cards that I've seen that I had on my watch list at the time. In many cases, this one went a few weeks ago, or actually May 27th. This is a Skybox Premium Star Rubies, numbered to 50. And what's nice about a lot of these cards and sets, they produced them across multiple sports. So you've got continuity in many cases across years, as we'll see with Essential Credentials, what I'll pull up next, as well. And you see similar designs, if not the exact same design, across sports for all of the other GOATs and top players of the 90s from those respective sports. So Pedro Martinez, a guy that doesn't have a huge hobby, but you see here, this card being super rare. This is one of the reasons why I don't sell cards on my own very much anymore, because I'm not great at taking photos. MC Sports Cards, credit Mike, a local guy. He does a great job with his business and taking photography, and this card looks sick. You can see on the back that it is stamped and numbered out of 50. This is the way they used to number them. So I don't know if it's scalable to make these things anymore with this the etching and the really high production quality, but it's just a shame that they don't. Any comments, guys, in this one?
The couple that designed these cards in the 90s were it was called Arena Design, and I believe it was Earl Arena and Gene McLeod. They were a married couple, and they have their fingerprints all over everything that came out of Fleer and Skybox, which was one company essentially. Everything from metal to these rubies to ultra medallions to a lot of the inserts that are super creative. And what I really like about this card, the 90s, there's something for everyone. There's really flashy cards, super gimmicky things like campy things, and then there's stuff that's incredibly classic. This to me falls somewhere in that category of classic and flashy. It's like an OG refractor, and it's serial numbered, which was rare in the 90s. The ruby foil on the logo is really sharp in hand. These are really popular cards, and they, like you said, Phil, they transcend across the three sports in this particular case from this year. Some subtle differences between the design. This has that kind of fishbone. What do they call that in Topps products? Like a prism. I think they call it the prism. Yeah. So, I mean, you see the homage even back to the 90s that the manufacturers were doing things back then that the companies are still using today. So this is a really nice card. And with the red, with the, for Boston and everything, it's a great card.
Yep. And I think speaking of Boston, I think Curt Schilling's done some things after he stopped playing to decrease the value of his cards. We don't want to go into that in much detail. We don't need to. But so here's the Essential Credentials. This is from 1998. I know for a fact, again, I'm not an expert here, but they made this insert in 1997, 99, 2000. So you've got continuity across multiple years, and they changed the design a lot across multiple years, and it's worked. So this is an example of a insert that I did not know about till I not only got back into the hobby, but till I joined YouTube. And then I saw people talking about these things. A lot of the collectors on YouTube were talking about these things and how like a Mark McGwire is like $400, $500. I'm like, what are these things? But they look really cool. I've purchased so this is the future version. There's also a now version for 1998. The future versions are numbered in 99, I believe. The now versions, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're numbered to the numbering, like the number of the card.
It's actually the checklist size, and then it adds up to the checklist total. So in this case, if there was like 101 of them, then Bonds would have had a number to 99 and a number to 2. Like that's how they set it up. So every player is on the checklist from this year and 99 add up to the total of the number of players on the checklist, which is kind of cool. Like you have there's like 2 players that means on every checklist who have a 1 of 1, which is really interesting.
Is that the same way in 1999, Ty?
It is. Yeah, 98 and 99 are both like that.
Can you stop sharing your screen real fast, Phil? I actually picked this one up. It's a Larry Walker from 1999.
Blow you up. Hold on. Yeah, I love that set.
It's just out of 95.
The 99s sell for about half or less the price of the 98s for some reason, and I don't really know why. The 98s are a little nicer. They tend to be a little nicer, I think, but the 99s are pretty close in hand, in my opinion. They're different.
I think there's value to the first right? It's the same thing with PMGs. So precious metal gems in 1998 out of 50 compared to precious metal gems out of 1999 out of 50.
Yeah.
98s, they look better a little bit, but they also go for way more because they were first, in my opinion.
So those ones are really cool that you guys just showed because they actually have layers. They're made from acetate and they have layers on them. And so the technology on the cards is like, frankly, superior to anything even being made today. It's just very fascinating how they look in hand. There's layers, there's depth, there's colors, it's acetate. It's very cool. So I'll give you a little bit of primer on these sets. This started actually in 1997 in baseball, and they had these credentials. So the base cards had these really cool like see-through design on them where you could see like the clouds and you hold them up and that piece is, again, it's layered. Then they did the credentials number to 299 and the ones with the stars for these essential credentials in 1997. Then you go to 1998, which is the ones you're talking about. So you see in this case, here's Gary Sheffield, numbered to 22, and then numbered to 79. So they did the green and the sort of red and pink designs. Those are the ones that are really popular. And then here's the 98s. And then they actually made them in a few other years. This is when it starts getting boring. Once you start hitting like 2000 on a lot of sets, they just lost their flair. They lost their creativity on a lot of them, and it's not as exciting.
So with that being said, I want to show you this real quick. So I have a binder right next to me full of like PC cards, right? But here is not as exciting like you mentioned, but it's still cool, right? Essential credential of Larry Walker at number 124. And so like these things, they're not very expensive. And like it just feels like this card to me is cooler than a lot of modern cards because there's just significantly less of them, and it's an important set history and all these things. And that's kind of the beauty of it. There are some big, heavy duty sets, but there's also some sets that you can get for good deals. And one thing I want to note is a lot of these sets have set up future products. So real fast, I'll share my screen. Like here is a Larry Walker out of 1998 Bowman's Best. This is where Atomic Refractor came from, right? Numbered to 100 this year.
Yeah.
They just look so good in hand. They look just as good, if not better, than the modern Atomic Refractors.
Photos do not do these particular cards any justice ever, no matter how well people capture them.
They're so cool. So actually, I just picked up a PSA 10 of one of these, Larry Walker. So that's pretty exciting, number to 100. But yeah, so a lot of these things also set up the future of the hobby, which is fun.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so, Chris, what have you thought so far? We've talked a lot, us three. Sorry, Ty, to cut you off. I just want to see what you guys are thinking thus far.
I don't, Jeff, you go first. Tell us what you're thinking.
There's some really cool card images, but it's a little overwhelming. All of this other language, I'm sure it's how people feel when they are jumping into the modern hobby right now. I mean, all these names, you guys might as well be talking about the lava fractors and ray waves. I don't really know. So I guess if it's something I want to go after, I'm going to have to take a much deeper dive into these cards for sure.
Yeah, it's just weird to think of like Skybox, a company that made like some basketball sets, in the early 90s, and then they dabbled in baseball a little bit. It's weird that cards made by that company can maintain this level of value and interest, 20 some odd years after they've stopped existing and stopped making cards. Kind of strange. So that's surprising to me.
So Chris, you brought up this one.
Oh yeah.
This would be, as Scott talked about, like the birth, some of these cards being very important with their provenance. This is the first ever refractor, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah.
These were printed roughly 241 times, I think. I owned a Barry Bonds. I wish I still had it, PSA 10. Oh. Bought it in 2000, sold it in 2001. Did okay. it had a ton of surface marks on it, and these things do get green. So one of the annoying things about this one in particular, and maybe a lot of the other finest refractors versus some of the other cards we just showed, is they've already turned green. They've hulked.
Yeah. Yep. So one thing I've noticed about you guys, Jeff and Chris, is you have a very defined set of preferences around like what you go after on ultra modern. Like a lot of stuff we've talked about in the past when we've done the Soto draft and and which rookie cards to go after. And you guys kind of stay focused on specific things, and then you figure out what players you want to go after and at what time. And I know, Chris, you really like autographs. Anytime I've ever sent you like a superfractor, you're like, give me the autograph version, not the suit, so there's like preferences around that. One of the things I really like about the 90s, just like purely from an investment perspective, long term, and I think, Phil, you said it is that 30 to 40 year olds right now who are still going to like these cards and desire them for another 30 to 40 years. Like they're going to want these. So I feel like there's a long runway. Whereas when I start looking at vintage sets of B tier players from vintage sets, I start wondering if some of those don't fall off over time. Like once you go back to the 70s and the 60s and do some of those players, that people don't really know as well, do they start to fall off? Whereas the 90s has a longer runway. And I feel like a lot of these players are starting to catch on who aren't named Griffey, Jeter, and now Bonds to some extent. So the 90s for baseball has been much cheaper on like every card than basketball by a landslide. It's like not even close. And even football for some players has started to take off on some sets. So what I want to do is kind of blitz through a handful of things and just kind of show you and then get your reactions to them, kind of as we wrap, and just see if anything speaks to you. So I'm going to try to go kind of fast, and we'll see if I duplicate anything. So these were those rubies from the 90s that Scott was talking about. So these started for baseball, I believe. Am I on the right one? Let's see. I want to jump back here. So these are the rubies from 1999. And they did these in an action parallel, which ended up being numbered to 50. That was very different from basketball, which wasn't the case. Then they did the same thing in 2000. You had this kind of like variation that was extreme with these stars on them. 2001 and 2002 had these, and they barely sell for anything. So if I go over to Market Movers, you'll see like there's a few football players. Then I start scrolling down. Griffey, $124 on the 2001. These ones are like not as desirable. Going after something that's iconic for baseball from the 90s. Just type in Griffey. You can use Market Movers or whatever other tool, eBay, Card Letter, 130 Point, whatever you want to do. But start with those guys to see what they sell for, because it'll give you a good indication. If it's not over $250, $300, like it's probably not in that top tier of sets that people are looking for. Let me jump all the way back and go back to precious metal gems. Anybody who collects in basketball knows how popular these cards are. There are no red and greens. If anybody's familiar with basketball or football, those don't exist in baseball. So it started in 1998, and you had this sort of scope effect that we see on some products today, which I know probably for Jeff and Chris, you guys, is not like that. Kind of falls into that Ray Wave category. You guys tend to like the true colors, the true parallel colors, which is a preference thing. But these were numbered to 50, and some of them really do shine and pop in hand. Like take a look at this John Elway. I know it's not a baseball card, but you can sort of get the effect here and see how much these things dazzle in hand. So if I scroll all the way to the top of this list, and you can see here's Jordan. So some of it's like the years overlap, kind of funny between the sports, but here's Barry Bonds, $29,000 last September. It is largely basketball and football that dominate on these. You had these sort of weird caricature ones called Hardball Galaxy. So here's Ken Griffey. That one was raw, sold for $20,000. You got the
Ty, let me stop you for 1 second. I have two quick questions while we're going through these. One, what product were these in?
These were in metal. The product was called metal. And at the time in the 90s, it was kind of viewed as a kid's product, and it was not very popular. It was like $1 or $2 a pack. And these were hard to hit, and people didn't think much of them. And if there's any set that comes out of binders still to this day from the 90s that has the most value that people just had chilling in a binder, it would be like cards like this. It's
Right,
wild.
you've mentioned that like these are really popular in basketball, especially. Do you think that's because it's the era of Michael Jordan? Like, isn't
Certainly
he just
helped.
like the most
Yeah.
popular basketball? Any card that has him is more popular than anyone else. So I would think that
Yeah.
the 90s, any set with him is going to be big.
Absolutely. And there was a real evolution, I think, in collecting preference from baseball to basketball for about a like 8-year run in the 90s, where, I mean, everybody I knew when I was a kid collected basketball. Today, the young kids are all collecting football. So that's an interesting thing to think about from a value perspective long term. But yeah, a lot of these a lot of the value probably was driven by Jordan, Kobe, Iverson, Shaq, some of the key players from the 90s, but most notably MJ.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Continue on.
No, good question. So then you switch to these gold ones, which were also from 1999. Those were also numbered to 50. So a lot of these do really well in value. Here's a Griffey that did 28,000. Really nice. These were kind of like an original gold parallel. They're subtle. They're more classic. They they really do shine in hand. But like, look at the value on some of these. You won't see the basketball ones show up because those are from 98 technically. 1998, just a weird year overlap. But like Pedro, these ones do pretty well in baseball. Like, they're pretty notable. And anywhere where you see numbered to 50, you're definitely not going to find 50 of them in circulation. Scott pointed out these ones, these certified from 1996 that had the stated print runs, the golds being the rarest. Like, they're incredibly gold and shiny. Some kind of liberties may be taken on these from 1996, claiming Derek Jeter as a rookie when we know he has 1993 rookie cards, but this card sold for $288,000. Frank Thomas, this was, I guess, the highest graded copy, stated print run again of 36,000. But then you can start going down the list, and this is a very popular set in football and baseball. It doesn't exist in basketball. You start getting down to lower price points, like $1,000 for other notable athletes. You saw the McGuire there. So the certified golds are very popular. This set is an interesting one. You have greens, reds, and purples. Kind of a weird order here. Reds are actually the lowest serial numbered, but these were actually pulled out of different products. So you could get them out of Donruss, out of Leaf, out of Donruss Update. Not many instances of that today, other than, I guess, did we see that on Taco Fractors or something? It's you don't see that a lot, where you can pull like different notable cards across other sets.
You're thinking of the
Hidden gems.
Hidden gems. Yeah.
Hidden gems. Thank you. Yeah. So this set by far is way more popular in baseball amongst baseball hobbyists than a football, and it didn't exist in basketball again. So you see Griffey 63,000 on this sale, and the PSA 7 11,000. It's pretty much all baseball dominating, and then you get to Barry Sanders at 4,500 in a PSA 9. So like, baseball guys are way more passionate about this set. It's one that I don't have any nostalgic attachment to as much, but it's definitely very popular. So we talked about essential.
I'm going to cut you off real quick, Ty. I like the Crusade Reds. I used to think they were kind of goofy looking and cheap, but once I learned about how actually rare they were, Phil's holding one right now. Well, a box for one.
Hey, Jeff, you have one of these? 98 Don Wasabi?
Ooh, I don't have any of that.
But I just bought this one. So this is on its way to me right now. I just bought a Larry Walker. And the thing is about these cards and 90s cards in general, they don't appear at times for years. Like, you might be hunting a red Crusade of some player, and you might not find it for 5 to 10 years. Like, they that's what's fun about these and why they're so sought after. Same with the Mirror Golds. So just so you kind of know hierarchy, the Red Crusades, the Mirror Golds, those are like top 5 parallels cards of the 90s. Same with PMGs. So like all those things, these are all like the cream of the crop.
Yep. I've got like 3 more or 4 more like quick ones just to show you. So this is an insert set that did sort of this like pointillism thing in the background. And then there's a parallel that's called Fusion Titanium, where they actually like laser cut the serial number right into the card, which is pretty innovative. I don't know of any other card that ever has done this. So every serial number on this set is like laser cut into the card like this. You get the image of the player in the background. So these are pretty striking, and the Griffies and the Jeters do really well on these. But you can actually get some of them, and you start scrolling down for like decent prices. Chipper Jones, $690. Terrible grade, obviously, but Clemens at 900 and a BGS 7.5. So that's a very popular set. Then we get into this set. Scott, you mentioned this, the embossed 1997 embossed refractors. So these Jordans go for a ton of money. These are very popular in basketball. You have these really interesting ones like this. It's like cut out like a brick wall of Charles Barkley, even with the hulking green color. And then you get into this type of deal with Griffey. That's sort of an embossed refractor. There, I'm trying to find one quickly that, like you referenced, Scott, where it's the decal edge. I don't know.
I
If I'll
have
find
one. I have one, Ty, if you want me to show it.
Okay, maybe let's show that at the end. I'll just blitz through a couple more things, and then you can show that one off. But this Flair Legacy. So Flair was a very classy set. It was very dramatic. It was expensive. And this set had legacies numbered to 100 or 150, depending on the year. But then they also had these masterpiece one of ones. So this Derek Jeter sold for $20,000. It had like 3 levels in it, kind of like if anybody who's familiar with Panini Select as a product today. But these did have, this was one of the other sets that had one of ones, one of the rare sets from the 90s. These were just very dramatic looking cards. This Griffey, for my money, like, what's your reaction to this card? Because this one to me, like, is just incredibly good looking, and in hand it like sparkles kind of. It's just a beautiful card. Does this do anything for you guys, or do you just sort of like, I don't know?
These are cool. I've actually I opened like a box of, I think it was 98 Flair football. I think my brother got it for me back in the day, and I pulled a Randy Moss that I believe was Row Zero. So I think I've seen the sparkle, and it looked incredible. Like, it looked great. Yeah. So I mean, I can tell this is 2 great images of Griffey. Like, that's a really awesome looking card.
Yeah. Yep. So then Scott referenced earlier these platinum medallions and the masterpiece. So this was the purple, which honestly, the purple doesn't do a lot for me, but they are one of ones. And so in that regard, they're really cool. But when you start getting down into this, like this year's, where they had sort of this like foiled sparkle text, and it's just very dramatic. It's almost like a black and white image on a lot of these. Some of them just look really awesome with that sort of gray platinum background. And then last but not least, Scott referenced these. So just a few more images. Like you can see, they really do. It's like today's ice. It's like sapphire, but on steroids, honestly. Almost like a shattered mirror in the background. And so some of these are really cool. So that's sort of a sampling from the 90s of some of the notable cards. And I could go on and on, all day talking about them. But with
that being said, here's the 97 that I was kind of hinting at. These are actually really confusing, but there's different levels of them basically. But this is the refractor, the gold refractor embossed die cut. And so these are really the top of the top for 97 finest. Really sought after. They're very fun. I did want to also show there's other cards that may not be like top tier sets, but even in Topps Finest in the late 90s, they had a lot of really cool inserts. So the one that I really enjoy is the man insert. We saw that reprinted in 2020 for like Jordan Alvarez and Bo Bichette rookies. But let me actually pull up, because I own a Larry Walker, the man, and they just had a lot of really clever design things that I think you both would appreciate. As an example, let me pull up my screen real quick. This is what they did with the man refractors. They're out of 75, and it's like the lowest numbered card you can get in the entire product. It's an insert parallel, but they put holographic foil on both sides of the card, which I think is just like little fun things like that. Once I flip it over, give me a second. So like, it's just, they're really fun and pretty cards. So
that's cool.
They're kind of pieces of art in a lot of ways, which I think is great. And then I would show more, but we're getting pretty long. I know we have a few questions to ask you both. But with that being said, Phil, is there anything else you want to add before we kind of ask what their favorites are, or what they would buy if they had to, that type of thing?
I'd like to add, and this was touched on a little bit in passing, but we have one of one fatigue with modern day products, right? Too many per set, even, never mind per year, per rookie of each star player in the ultra modern or modern era, post, 2010. But that the ultra medallion, whatever that purple card was, what is that? Master something.
Masterpiece.
Yeah, I think there was a Tony Gwynn that recently sold over last year for like 20,000. One of my friends has the Barry Bonds equivalent, and like, yes, it doesn't do much for me, but if it's one of the few '90s one of ones that Barry Bonds has, if you're bullish about Barry Bonds or any of these guys,
Yeah.
hell, like I'm sure people have spent more than $20,000 on Luis Arias, comparing, well, maybe not comparing him to Tony Gwynn a little bit, but not really, because that's not fair. But I really respect that. There's a few amount of parallels and a few amount of like the lower numbered parallels too.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on this stuff yet, so if I said anything wrong, please forgive me, '90s collectors, if you're listening. But I can only
Blast him in the comments.
Yeah,
Blast
please
him.
don't. I'm learning. Don't kick me out of your
Right about-
fun stuff. But like the Gem Master Walker I picked up, there's only like 4 other one of ones that I can think of from those years, and 3 of them are in one set in the showcase. And so really there's only 3 sets with one of ones that I know of. Ty, are there more that I'm missing besides Ultra
Masterpiece.
and the showcase one of ones? Like, what am I forgetting here?
Yeah. No, those are the only ones I'm aware of.
So it's really fun to track down those type of cards. Like this one was in a box for 25 years before it popped up a month ago. So it's just one of those things where they are very sought after, very rare, very fun. It's a whole new world.
There are there's one from the later 90s Topps Gold label.
Is there gold label 101s too?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more I'm forgetting, but I'm learning. But those are kind of the high-end sought-after ones. So with that being said, Chris, Jeff, thanks for sitting through this entire presentation. I feel like this was like a timeshare trying to get you to buy in. But what are your thoughts? What stood out to you the most? What did nothing for you? Be brutally honest. It's going to be fun to hear what you have to think.
Well, I would like to say that, as I said, it's a little bit overwhelming. So I'm still trying to take it all in. One thing I really do like is that there seems to be value in non-rookie cards. Even just looking when Phil showed that Pedro, I mean, that's a large price to pay for a non-rookie card. So it does make me interested in looking at some of the players that I liked from the 90s, like a Robin Yount. If he appears in any of those sets, that might be something I might look at. But I feel like this would be an easy path to go down to spend a lot of money not knowing what you're doing.
Yes, you need to be very careful. And that's what I'm trying to teach myself, is not to jump in, not to spend too much, to know what you're buying. So there's a podcast called Precious Metal Gents that was just started. Shout out to them about a month ago. And they are focused entirely on 1990s inserts. If you're interested in this, we probably won't do another video on it, so check out theirs. But they gave advice on that, Jeff. They said, learn about it for a month or a few months. Write down the stuff you're really interested in, rank it, talk to 90s collectors, and then buy. Don't just hop in and buy, because that's how you're going to buy stuff that you just really don't like.
Makes
and
sense.
It's true. It's very true. And I sometimes get a little bit overzealous myself and buy too much, which I'm sure you've all witnessed. Not like over my budget, but like cards I might regret and then resell later. But education's really important. Okay. What do you think, Chris?
I mean, I'm gonna be completely honest. None of these like Crusades or Precious Metal Gems, none of that stuff is really like, it doesn't do anything for me. I don't have any interest in like Fleer or Skybox. Those, I don't know. Nothing's hitting for me.
I told Ty you were gonna say that. I said Chris is gonna say nothing. You're muted, Ty, but Chris was gonna say nothing. It doesn't do it for me. But Chris, why doesn't it? Like you love like something specific. Like I want to know what needs to happen for you to evolve outside of that like narrow focus of modern flagship or whatever you guys do.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't evolve quickly. I can tell you that on a personal level. But I don't know. Like the things that the ones that I was interested in are those like Bowman's Best Atomics. Like those are great. I've actually tried. I have some out of the 97 Bowman's Best set, but those are more common. Like those aren't numbered. The 98 ones, I think some of them even have autos. Like those are great. I've looked at a bunch of Chipper Jones cards and been outbid by a mile. The other 90s stuff, I just still think that the 93 Finest Refractors, like if there is anything from the 90s I'm gonna actually get into, it's probably that set.
Yeah,
that one to me has absolutely everything that I would want. The first set that ever did refractors, like it's special. I've never had any interest in Gold Label. None.
Yeah, so
Not gonna
that's the other gold label, and then there was an Andrew Jones Legacy 1 of 1
Legacy,
masterpiece.
thank you. That's the other one I forgot.
That sold, yeah. Well, so it's the Legacy masterpieces from Flair that sold for 1.6K. But
No, like, and all those cards are like, like I said, they're cool, they look good, but like there's no entry point that's remotely even feasible. Like for Jeff and I to just decide, well, I am going to go buy a PMG of Barry Bonds because I like him. Oh, it's $30,000 or whatever. Like there's no like, where's my even starting point for sets like that? I got to go get like a Ryan Klesko or a Brian Jordan or some random Braves player. But I would, I don't know. It just doesn't. I don't get excited.
You will. It's one of those
You
things.
will.
I didn't get excited by it for years, dude. For years, I did not care about them. And Modern is becoming such a cluster that this stuff is a breath of fresh air. I'm telling you. That's legitimately how I feel. This stuff might feel overwhelming to you guys right now. If you spent like an iota of the time you spent learning all this Modern crap, like you would learn it so fast. In a few weeks, you would understand a lot.
I mean, that may be, but the other thing that I know Chris likes about the hobby, which I like a lot too, is being able to watch the players you collect.
Yeah.
So that's a big appeal for the Modern, even though they're a lot of the parallels are kind of going.
That's why all of the Modern players have premiums.
The field in a cart, but it's still appealing to watch them play. One other set I am actually interested in. I was waiting to see if any of you guys would mention it. I know they aren't that rare. It's a little bit older, but the 93 SP Hollow Views, the red parallels of those that are die cut, that was like one of the very first like really high end inserts that I was aware of. Like that's, I think I afforded like 2 of those boxes, I think, in their whole run. But those cards are phenomenal. I remember seeing occasionally you'd see the Michael Jordan at a show, and it was just mind blowing how thick the plastic it was in. It looks like a gas station key ring or something. But like I'd be interested to go back and maybe try to complete that set now that there's more of those cards out there, because those looked incredible. And it's more affordable than any of those PMGs or the Crusades or all that other stuff.
Yeah. And one other thing I would like to say about this whole discussion is it does make me appreciate and miss that competition for the companies out there to try to one up another. It'd be fun to see what sort of creativity would be out there currently if there was more competition in the space.
Yeah, I think what's hurting Chris's ability to get into this market is because he's got a little bit of a tops bias. So all of the things that he's talking about are, some sort of tops, Bowman, et cetera, et cetera. I think with me being able to dabble with other sports, and I could be wrong on this, this isn't a basketball or football podcast, and Ty knows the most here, but like it seems like PMGs are king for some of those other sports, like whether it's Jerry Rice or Barry Sanders. So it was a lot more simple when I made a decision to buy like a Shaq Red PMG. And you don't have that sort of tops legacy as much with those other sports. And then a guy like Tom Brady actually has an essential credentials rookie. So if you were a Brady collector and if you liked football, then that could have been a way for you to kind of, that would be like your kind of gateway drug, if you will, to get into other parallels from the earlier 90s, different players. Baseball seems a bit more like dispersed, and the learning curve seems a bit higher. The hierarchy is going to be more clear than it's going to be with the ultra modern stuff, because there's, a finite amount of desirable cards and parallels, but it still is a learning curve, which I think we've revealed here for those that don't really do the 90s stuff yet.
And after this episode, if you still don't like them, that's totally cool. And I'm talking to Chris and Jeff, and also talking to anybody who listened this far into this video. It's not a big deal. Collect what you like. I always say that type of stuff, and I'm not doing that just to like walk everything back that I said. I fully believe that the 90s are awesome. I'm just barely getting into it myself after being a collector for this long. But one thing I like about the 90s, the last thing I'll say, is nowadays it's kind of rookie or bust. There's a few exceptions to that rule when it comes to modern cards, right? Like there might be a couple specific Stadium Club variations or a couple super short prints that are really nice. But back in the 1990s, it feels kind of like what Chris and Jeff like to do, but consistently of buying good looking cards. And that's one thing that is enjoyable about that for me. And it makes sense because they're not going to produce an SSP of every single player Golden Mirror forever and for the next 30 years. And it's just, it was a time where it was very specific, very exciting in that little bubble before it became the hobby we know now. And realistically, the Topps bias is real and it's hard to get over. But Topps probably was like the least impressive at making sets in the 90s in some ways.
Yeah, they were actually, and I think so. I'll give 2 parting warnings. One is a lot of 90s inserts and parallels, the big ones, are massively faked out of China.
Yeah.
Be careful. Just don't buy ungraded. And even then, like if anybody, I'm not saying this to you guys, anybody who's listening, if you are thinking of buying a big, like a PMG or a Star Rubies, especially, or any of those, like message somebody who knows, who might know, or put it on blowout forums to like make sure, like, is this good? If it looks too good to be true, like it's too good to be true. Like don't buy it. I see it regularly on Instagram that people who know these cards are like, this is fake and it's graded by one of the grading companies and it's fake. So just be careful. And the other thing is be really aware of market manipulation. If there's actually one segment of the hobby I've seen actually really prone to pump and dump, it's 90s stuff. And it doesn't take a lot because the cards are rare and they don't hit often. And so you'll see cards that just go like 8x in a matter of a few months and get a ton of buzz. In the last year, platinum medallions have gotten really popular. In some ways, they've caught up to some of the other parallels, but I think there's a little bit of funny business going on there too. So just be aware of that and don't get like caught up into the hype of something that's suddenly like going meteoric. Like just be careful. So
yeah. One thing I want to point out, Ty, is I am trying to buy only PSA graded cards from this era if I can, because Beckett doesn't give any protection. They stink.
That's true.
Like we saw this. There's actually a guy who bought a Jordan PMG that was not even a PMG. Some guy colored it red with a Sharpie, and BGS graded it and said it was authentic. And then it was sold through eBay, and the eBay authentication program passed it because they don't regrade the card. They just make sure it's true to the case. And you can't really return it at that point because it passed authentication. So this guy was out $20,000. And so it's one of those things where eBay then stepped in and paid it back, but not refunded for the card. Like the actual guy who sold it didn't have to pay the money back. So it's a whole mess. But my point is PSA's protection that they have is really good, and B just doesn't have it, which sucks because it'd be great if they did.
Yeah. You can check out Jordan PMG Saga for more on that.
It's worth watching. It's pretty scary, honestly.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts from anybody here? That was quite a bit longer than we anticipated. But
I have a question, but we've probably gone too long. So I was just going to say
this will be only 2 videos.
Put it in the comments. Put it in the comments.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, is there a go-to 90s autograph set or set with autographs?
I'm sure there is. I just don't know it. Ty?
All right, then edit that out.
There are some autos, but yeah, that'd be another video. Let us know if you want more.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments down below if you liked this type of discussion, if we should do more of it, if you like the 90s, if you don't. If you do, tell us why, and if you don't, tell us why. Other than that, we will have another video out later this week, and we'll see you in that one.
It's the best.